Hello there, all you amazing people. We are going to talk a little bit about Linux and why I think and history shows that Linux is not a desktop operating system. Or system. Whatever, put in whatever you want. Before you get angry, I have to clarify some things so you understand what I am coming from and my thought. So when I say desktop, I mean stuff like this. The Steam Deck that runs Linux, is that a desktop? That's not its primary function. It can be a desktop, but it's not a primary function. This primary function here could be a desktop or a workstation. What is a desktop and what is a workstation? A desktop is what I would call like a generalized, general purpose computer. So it can do anything. You can set it up to do anything, but it's not meant to have like a one task or two or three task application. It's anything from social media creation, consuming, gaming, entertainment, development, research. That's what I would call a generalized desktop. A workstation is typically a development station. Can you do all of these things on a development station? Yes, but its main purpose is that you sit in front of it and you do development, or you do infrastructure thingamadooskies, or you do computer administrations. Typically, what a workstation would be is like what you see in the IT departments, where a desktop is what you see in accounting, or you see at the CEO's office and stuff like that, to give you like a somewhat distinction, okay? So now I've told you what a general purpose operating system is, what a desktop is, and what a workstation is. And these are kind of like the consensus of the masses, like it's the social construct. And if you don't know what a social construct is, go talk to your, I think it's either your psychology professor or your social class professor. One of those can explain to you what a social construct is. It will take hours to get into that. But that's kind of the generalized idea of what the vast majority of people say, yeah, that's a workstation, that's a generalized operating system, that's a desktop. Why have I clarified that? Well, that's because in my humble opinion, dealing with Linux for close to 30 years now, and again, that's what history shows us, and that is what, history is a good prediction of the future, as a lot of smart people will say. Linux is really great for almost anything that require a specific purpose-built system. The Steam Deck is a good example here. What is the Steam Deck? What is the primary function of the Steam Deck? It is to serve games from the Steam App Store. Serve games from the Steam App Store. Then they are doing a lot of back-end stuff that also we can use on the Linux desktops, and we love them, and I use Proton all the time, and it's amazing. But the Steam Deck's main function is not to be a media consumption device. It's not meant to be a development station. It's meant to be a social media station. It's not meant to be, a family computer. Its main purpose, even if you look at like the Steam marketing, if you look up the Steam Deck here, powerful portable PC gaming designed for comfortable console-like user experience. All of this is not desktop. It says purposely made to allow you to play games on this form factor. Another thing about the difference between, let's say, a purpose-built OS and a non-purpose-built OS, a purpose-built and a generalized OS, is that a generalized OS has to work on as many iterations thinkable and doing as many tasks thinkable on as diverse hardware as thinkable. The Steam Deck works really well. The same reason why PlayStation works really well, and Xbox and Nintendo works really well. They take, and all of those, besides Xbox, run some version of Unix. Okay? I think Nintendo still uses Linux. PlayStation uses a form of FreeBSD. The Steam Deck uses Linux. Why are the majority of them using something like Linux or Unix-like system? Because it's really great to build a system around that only have to support limited hardware and do one or two things. Like you see here with the Steam Deck. Again, that's also why Linux is great as a web server. It's why Linux is great as a Proxmox, like running Proxmox and stuff like that. Because Linux is, and it's kind of testament to its customizability, to be honest. You can streamline it so much that it does one or two things amazing. But for you and me that want a gaming system, a development system, a consuming system, we want a system that can support as many peripherals and hardware as possible. That's where it falls short, because all of the effort on Linux the last 30 plus years has been put in to make Linux a specific purpose-built OS, not a generalized OS. If we look at the popular Linux distributions, we can go on to good old DistroWatch. Even it's not a good representation, but I will explain to you when you get there. So if you look at good old DistroWatch here, most Linux users, the vast majority of Linux users, and we're talking the whole Linux landscape, not just servers or desktop, they are probably running either Ubuntu or Fedora. That would probably account for, like, let's say 90% of all Linux users ever. And then maybe 5% is running Debian, and the rest is all of the other distributions. So what is Ubuntu? Ubuntu is a workstation OS. Okay, I know it says Ubuntu desktop, and a lot of us use Ubuntu on the desktop, but Ubuntu, if you look at what Ubuntu do with, or what Canonical do with Ubuntu, they are focusing a lot on SQL optimization, database optimization, file server optimization, and they put in a little bit of Steam optimization, stuff like in there, because they know a big part of their users also use it as a generalized computing operating system. Just because I say that its main focus is one thing, don't mean that they are not also working on other things, or it cannot be used on other things. It just means that for Canonical, let's say gaming optimization takes a lesser priority than anything that has to do with the corporate world and server market. So workstation/server. That's where they make all their money. And then, if they have resources for it, or if it's like somewhat easily implementable and stuff like that, or if there's a high enough demand, they will give us, these nice to have features. If we look at Fedora here, and it's actually a really, really good idea to go in and get Fedora. Do you see a Fedora desktop here? You see Fedora Core. I will say that's enterprise Cloud, Enterprise IoT, Enterprise Server, Enterprise Workstation, Enterprise. Again, just like with Ubuntu. That don't mean that they won't give you generalized computing or OS things. It just means this is the focus. This is where 90 or 95 or 80% of the focus is going to be put on. The enterprise, not the desktop. And Linux is great for cloud. Linux is great for IoT. Linux is great for have an immutable system. That's why we have it on Steam Deck. Like server and as a workstation. If you want to develop and you're not developing Windows-specific software, Linux is great as a development station. Depending on what server setup you have, it can be great as a server administration terminal and what have you not. Debian is a little bit like what good old Fedora is. It's like the universal operating system. But what do most people use Debian for? Security jobs and server jobs. Not many use it as a dedicated desktop. That's why Ubuntu is based on Debian, because they wanted it to be more desktop friendly in the beginning, because in the beginning Ubuntu was meant to be a desktop only OS. From about 2004 to 2011-ish or 12-ish, Ubuntu was meant to be desktop only, but there was not enough market to do it. They couldn't make money, they couldn't sustain themselves, so they had to focus on the server/enterprise market. And then, of course, you and I can use it as our little hobby OS or main OS if that's what you desire. But I think you guys and girls need to understand this. Again, I get so many people coming at me with oh, you fool, Linux is the best desktop OS ever because it runs on supercomputers. Yeah, but supercomputers' workloads are not YouTube. They are not let's play the latest game. It's not how many porn sites can I watch at one time, It's not oh, let me stalk my ex because I'm really fucking still into them thing. A supercomputer do really specific workloads, and that's it. And yes, Linux is amazing for that. Where Linux falls short is when you try to make something where the 95 or 90% of the whole industry is focusing on one thing, and you're trying to shoehorn it in to be something else. And you may say right now, Kent, you stupid idiot, what about Windows? Windows do exactly this. You all hate Windows 11. I kind of get it. It's not the most, amazing OS ever. Why can't I don't want to download it. Let's go I hate Microsoft sites. They're so fucking awful. Windows, there you go. And it defaulted to Danish. Let me fix that for you for a bit here. Where the fuck is Murica? Huh? North America, there it is. And then it defaulted to fucking, what? Yeah, again, I said North Africa. Oh, god damn it. South Africa. Where the fuck is America? Let's do, United States is right there. Fuck me. Let's do UK. So again, I'm not saying Windows is amazing and the best OS ever. I'm not saying that Microsoft is doing a good job. Just look at the fucking bullshit I have to deal with here. Okay, just let's get that nail that into your brain first of all. But you're Windows is both a server OS and a general purpose OS. No, it's not. Because this is what we would be using on the desktop if you are a sad, lonely, no girlfriend, no high IQ Windows user. But what if we look at Windows Server? So we have Windows System Center. There you go. We have Windows Server on Azure. You see, it's totally different websites. Totally different. It's separated. Why is that? Well, if you Google, Windows Server 2022, not plus 2022. This is what Windows Server looks like, and I'm actually messing with this at work. More like this. And most of the time you install Windows Server headless, and you only have the terminal up, and you use this like administration window or system, what is it called? Service Manager or Server Manager on your local Windows computer, Windows 11 computer and stuff like that, or Windows 10 computer. So what Windows Server is this. You can also get Windows IoT, or I think it's called Windows Embedded now, and you can get Windows File Server, and you can get Windows Data Server. They have like specific version of Windows Server for specific use cases. What Windows Server is more like is actually Ubuntu. Windows Server is more like Ubuntu, sorry. Did I say Windows Ubuntu? What I meant to say is like what Windows Server is, like if you have to make like the biggest correlation or what is most alike on the Linux side. We all like to compare Ubuntu with Windows 11, but technically we should compare Ubuntu and Fedora with Windows Server because they are built for the same audience. I know people that use Windows Server as a desktop OS because they don't have all of the shittiness that comes with Windows 11. They don't have DirectX. You can install it, but they don't have it by default, and they don't have all the Xbox thingies and all of the Facebook ads and all of that fucking plot that everyone hates to or love to hate on. But technically, every Linux distribution, beside maybe Mint and all the other ones, but every popular big Linux distribution, like the Linux distributions that account for probably 95 to 99% of all Linux users, if you put SUSE in there also, their distributions out of the gate is more attuned to Windows Server, or are more alike Windows Server and are meant for people that will run Windows Server than Windows 11. Again, that don't mean you can't run it as a desktop. I'm just talking about who is the main target audience. If you have ever ran Windows Server, it's actually a fucking great OS. I will be honest here, it's really fast because it don't have a lot of animation. It has no animation. When you move, Windows around, you move a box around like they did in the good old fucking 95 days. There's, like I said, no Xbox, there's no Teams, there's no Skype, there's no DirectX 11, or it's really a slimmed down version of DirectX. What you get is kind of let's say you take Arch Linux and you install XFCE on top of it. That is Windows Server. Then you add Windows services to it. And depending on what version you select during the installation process, like embedded, headless server, desktop server, you can get more or less of that. So Windows do, or Microsoft do, the exact same thing. They are separating their generalized consumer OS versus their enterprise IT professional system. So they have generalized and purpose-built separate. Yes, a lot of people use Windows as a development station also. There are overlaps. There are overlaps. Just like a lot of people that use Linux as their development station also use Linux as their, consumption device, even their gaming device. There are overlap. But where it makes sense, Microsoft is separating Windows Server for Windows 11. It's not the same system. Just like Linux do it here, or Fedora do it here, SUSE do it with Leap and Tumbleweed, or SUSE versus OpenSUSE. Ubuntu, they also have the IoT stuff and what have you not, if I'm not mistaken, if you go in here. Ubuntu Server, they have Ubuntu Desktop, so they do a little bit kind of the same thing, where Ubuntu Server is more for cloud thingies, but the Ubuntu Desktop is still mainly meant as a workstation. So they just have basically they have what Fedora have here. It's the same shit. Here, Ubuntu Core, Windows Subsystem for Linux, FIPS, Desktop Server, so it's more or less just the same shit as they have here with Fedora. And I know a lot of you amazing people say, what about MX Linux? What about Mint? What about Endeavour OS? What about Fedora? What about Sorian, Pop OS, Neon, Nebo, and all of these amazing Elementary OS, Sparky, all of these amazing desktop-focused Linux distributions. They are great. And yes, they are trying to take a Windows Server or Ubuntu workstation or Fedora workstation or Debian workstation and make it as consumer and generalized friendly as possible. They are all falling short because what people expect from, let's say, a Windows 11 system on Mac OS systems, Linux is not providing in Elementary OS. Not even Ubuntu or Fedora providing it. Because we are trying to basically shoehorn a lumberjack. Let me put it this way. you're trying to shoehorn a big burly lumberjack that spits fucking, chew tobacco all over the place and are really vulgar and all of that shit, and you're trying to shoehorn the lumberjack into like a tight fucking Hugo Boss suit, and put him into a board of directors and have to function in like CEO capacity with really high-end people, top of the crops, CEOs and high society people, and take him out on really fancy dinners and stuff like that. That's what all of these distributions are trying to do, and some do it better than others. I'm not knocking them. Like Mint is really popular, Elementary OS is popular, MX is popular. Some of them do it with great success, but they only account for about, let's say, if you take all of the desktop-focused Linux distributions, if I'm being generous here, they probably only account for between 5 to 10% of the overall Linux user base. All of the rest are using Linux Enterprise or Linux specific or non-generic Linux, let me try again, non-generic OS or non-universal OS specific distributions. That's what most people are using. And most people, like only 3.8% of the desktop market, are actually using Linux as a desktop. The rest of the world is using Linux as what it's meant to be, a specific purpose-built embedded system, IoT system, a Steam Deck system. A really good example here is, and I did this in the late 90s, and I don't think many of you know about QNX. QNX is a commercial Unix-like real-time operating system and aimed primarily at the embedded system market. QNX, they did a free version back in the good olden days that looked like this, that you could run on your desktop because they wanted to see if they could get a market into the desktop just like Linux did. QNX is being used so much or almost exclusively, if I'm not mistaken, in medical fields. So they are running, the not radio scanners, the head scanners, what is not EMT, what they call ETC, TET, what the fuck, I can't remember what they call the ones that scans your body and stuff like that. They are running, the heart rate monitors on your side of your bed and stuff like that. That's not mostly Linux, that's mostly QNX, and almost nobody knows about QNX. Because again, it's a purposely built system that does one thing really fucking well, just like Linux. If you look into what the majority of development in the kernel of itself, if you're going to be really anal and say Linux is only the kernel, 99% of all effective development in the Linux kernel is meant towards servers, the corporate world, not so much the desktop. Yes, Steam puts some in there, Red Hat and other companies, they help out a little bit with making more desktop friendly, but the vast majority of effort that the Linux kernel development team is putting into the Linux development is not desktop related. Some of it we will benefit from, but it's not meant to be like that. What I am trying to say here is, if you take good old Windows 11 here, if you look at the way Windows 11 is being developed for Microsoft, hate it all you want, but let's take the hate away a little bit. Let's take hating Microsoft away. How is Microsoft developing Windows 11? Towards one specific purpose, to be a generalized computing system. How are they developing Windows Server? Self-explanatory. How is Fedora developing Linux? Main focus, these things down here. Ubuntu, main focus, these things here. Again, I'm not saying you can't use it as a desktop. It's just not their main priority. Your AI, Kubernetes, security, virtualization, public cloud, private cloud, IoT and edge, you get it. You're a smart person, you get this shit, okay? If you want Linux to compete with Windows 11, we need people like these guys up here with a lot of money and a lot of backing to do the same shit. They need to make a Linux generalized OS. And that's not Ubuntu. Just because it's called Ubuntu Desktop, that's not Ubuntu Desktop. Its main priority is a workstation. It's not meant to be a generalized consumption device, even though they put some effort into do that also because they know a large part of their customer base also use Ubuntu at home and as a generalized computing OS. But it's not its main purpose. I am a little bit tired of seeing all of these Linux YouTubers out there talking about how Linux is great on the desktop, and Linux is like, they almost say that Linux only purpose is on the desktop and Linux is best on the desktop. Again, they're trying to take the lumberjack and say he's the best CEO and he can rub shoulders with kings and queens and do it in the proper way and a proper, table manner and all of that etiquette amount, high society. That's not the case. We're putting a pig into a dress, basically. If Linux want to be what Windows 11 is, they need to make a Linux distribution like Elementary OS. And the community and the corporate world need to support it as much as they support the server, the IoT Linuxes, the Android Linuxes, the Steam Linuxes, the server Linuxes, etc., etc. But we all know, we all have seen Up till this day, for 30 plus years, every Linux distribution that tries to be desktop only barely fucking makes it. Elementary OS is in a rocky state. A lot of distributions is in a rocky state. I would probably say the longest lived desktop only Linux distribution would probably be Mint. Where do we have good old Mint? Here, Linux Mint. And if you look at Linux Mint's financial, I think they have about like close to $1 million in the bank or something like that, and that's nothing. I know it sounds like a lot of money, but for a business, that's nothing. It's so easy to make or save up to have $1 million in the bank. And how long have Linux Mint been around for? 2006. They should not have about $1 million or $2 million. They should have like hundreds of millions in the bank. Canonical have that. Fedora have that. SUSE have that are then sponsoring OpenSUSE. And why do they have millions, hundreds of millions in the bank? Because their main focus is not the Linux desktop. This should tell you something. If you have just a little bit inklings of logic and intelligence in your body, just a little bit in your bone, this should tell you why Linux on the year of the Linux desktop and why Steam putting effort into Linux is not going to make Linux into a desktop OS that will replace Windows. It's because there are too little support for it from everyone, like users, companies, etc., etc., etc. And yes, there are being made efforts to help Linux on the desktop, but it's massively outweighed by the big corporate push for Linux, because that's where Linux makes sense. The whole design of Linux makes so much more sense on supercomputers, IoT devices, Steam Decks, purposely built systems. If you came to me and you told me, I want a generalized OS for my company, I would say, go with Windows. But if you came to me and say, I'm developing this embedded system or this IoT device, or I'm developing this specific device that only has to do a few things, I would 9 out of 10 times say, go with either FreeBSD or Linux, because they are really good and you have that much customizability over it. Really fucking easy to morph Linux into being a watchOS. Like if you had the old Samsung watches, they would run Tizen. Well, they Google Wear nowadays, Linux, Linux on the phone, Samsung Galaxy S21, I think it is. Linux is amazing to build a system around it, or support a system that only do a few things. I know mobile phones and tablets are a little bit, crazy and the other side, but if you think like this is not a desktop, it can function as a desktop, but it's not a desktop. Tablets and mobile phones, even though they're massively capable today and they can to some degree replace laptops, and for some people desktops, they still have a lot of limitations that your gaming computer don't have or your workstation don't have. There's still a massive amount of limitations to tablets and phones. The second you want to go outside Android's or Samsung's ecosystem, you get into a heap of fucking issues. The same on iOS devices. The heap of difficulties you don't get into with your good old gaming computer and stuff like that. But this is also what gets me into a lot of trouble with the Linux community, is that they want Linux so bad on the good old desktop here that they don't see what's happening in front of them. If the mass IT industry as a whole would want Linux on the desktop, they would put more effort into Linux on the desktop. If they really felt there was a need to replace Microsoft Windows, like a massive need, they will do it. That's what Netflix did with the cable television. People were tired of cable television and the way that it functioned. Then Netflix came around, had the right idea, and everyone jumped on the bandwagon and supported them to the degree that now everyone has their fucking own, streaming service, which is a problem in of itself. If something really needs to be replaced, the world, the collective, will support it if it's really needed. Linux have tried for 30 plus years to take over the desktop. Up till now, and maybe for a lot of many years to come, it has not been necessary, because then Linux would have taken over the desktop. If the vast majority of users and consumers would agree that we didn't need Windows, but we need Linux, even with all of the bad shit Microsoft have done with Windows and all of the bad shit and telemetry and all that shit that Windows does, people still to this day don't feel strong enough, or enough people don't feel strong enough to replace Windows. Will that day come? Who knows? There's possibilities. But we can't live in what ifs. We can't live in, it may happen. We have to live in what is happening. I feel a lot of Linux people, they live in the what ifs, the maybes. And they prepare and plan for the what ifs and maybes, and then they are confused why nothing is happening. That's because you cannot plan. You can somewhat plan and prepare for the what if and maybes, but it cannot be your main focus. That's what Ubuntu realized, Canonical realized, Fedora realized, Debian realized, SUSE realized. They realized that we cannot, as much as we want Linux to be the primary desktop, the world is just not there yet and may never be there. So we have to focus in places where the world is there. You know, Unix was massive before Linux. Linux just made Unix more accessible, in quotes, Unix-like. So what Linux did for the server market, again, something people don't talk much about, is it gave people a better, cheaper way of running their existing Unix software and Unix systems. And that was why Linux took off on the server market. Not because it was specifically better than other systems. There was a need to replace Unix. There was a need. People wanted to replace Unix. And they did that with Linux. Just like on the web hosting thing, Windows is categorically bad as a web hosting server. There was a need to find something better. Windows came in there. Linux came in there. Windows, on the other hand, is really great as like an administrative server or a domain server or a file server. And that's why it's still one of the biggest ones in those areas. Don't try to force something to happen that the world is not ready for or the world don't want to happen. It will lead to failure. You can prepare for it, you can push a little bit forward, but work in the world that we live in now. And again, that's what SUSE, Ubuntu, and Fedora are doing. They are pushing desktop technologies into Linux, like I said before. But their main focus is make Linux the best OS it can be for the world we live in now, and where Linux actually are needed and where people want Linux. Most people don't want Linux on the desktop. As much as they bitch and moan about Mac OS and Windows, they still prefer that. So instead of trying to take over the desktop world, try and make Linux part of that world. That's what Windows did with Windows Subsystem for Linux. If you're developing for Linux, you don't need a Linux virtualization anymore. You don't even need to run a Linux desktop anymore. And that alone is the biggest fucking dagger to the Linux on the desktop ever, because now you don't need to run a dedicated Linux machine. You just run Windows. There's so many developers that develop for multiple platforms that went back to Windows because of Windows Subsystem for Linux and ditched their Linux VM or ditched their Linux desktop. Linux needs to do something. Linux needs to be more compatible with the desktop world we are in today than trying to fight it. I hope this was interesting. It's a little bit of a long one. See you all later. Bye bye.